The air is thick with tension. The hardwood vibrates under the weight of giants, their sneakers screeching with every cut, every pivot. The ball snaps between hands, a blur of motion and precision. The whistle sounds, sharp, piercing, and for a moment, everything stops. Then, like a tidal wave, the roar of the crowd crashes down. It's March Madness, the grandest stage in college basketball. But in this era, there is no madness, no unpredictability, no Cinderella stories. There is only inevitability. UCLA wins. That's just how it is. Opponents don't come to play, they come to survive. They know what's coming. The relentless full-court press, the crisp execution, the unshakable discipline. The scoreboard might as well start with UCLA up by 10, because once that tip-off happens, there's only one outcome. But it wasn't always like this. Once upon a time, UCLA was just another name in the crowd, a program with no banners, no legends, no fear factor. A school with no real reason to believe it could ever stand among the greats. Then came a quiet, unassuming man from Indiana. No ego, no gimmicks, no theatrics. Just a philosophy so simple, so methodical, that it reshaped college basketball forever. 10 championships in 12 years. An 88-game win streak. Perfection repeated. This is not just a dynasty. This is the greatest empire the sport has ever seen. And this is the story of how John Wooden built it. The world of college basketball in the 1940s and 50s belonged to the heartland. Kentucky, Kansas, and Indiana ruled the sports like unshakable monarchs, their banners hanging high, their legends already cemented. The game was built on tradition, deep, unshakable roots planted in the Midwest and South. Championships passed between a small circle of elites, teams that played the game the right way, with hard-nosed defense, physical play, and slow, methodical offenses designed to grind opponents into dust. Out west, basketball was an afterthought, a novelty. UCLA existed in the shadows of that world, a school better known for academics than athletics, tucked away on the sun-drenched coastline of California. Their gym, if you could even call it that, was a cramped little space inside the men's gymnasium, nicknamed the B.O. Barn because of its poor ventilation. The crowds were sparse, the expectations lower. There were no national headlines, no top recruits flocking to Westwood. The Bruins were just another team, lost in the shuffle. Between 1919 and 1948, they had no championships, no Final Fours, nothing that would even suggest they could one day rise to the top. Then, in 1948, the school made a hire that barely registered beyond the campus. John Wooden, a quiet, unassuming coach from Indiana State.
When we drove in and got close to California, I think, why in the world did I get into this? It was rather frightening to me, to be honest.
At a cocktail party, after he came, he would go and just sort of hide in a corner. He was very much ill at ease. He didn't like to mix. He didn't really understand how.
I was told by Dutch Faring, a teammate of mine at Purdue, he said, well, Johnny, you're going to find basketball a lot different. It's way down on the totem pole out here than it is back in Indiana.
No one knew much about him. He had played at Purdue, had a solid career, but this was no flashy big-name hire. He didn't come with a championship pedigree. He didn't come with a system that fit the traditional mold of college basketball powerhouses. Instead, he came with a set of principles. Wooden believed in discipline, repetition, and mastery of the fundamentals. He believed that perfection wasn't a goal, it was a habit. His teams would play with speed, with precision, with intelligence, and above all, they would play the right way. But there was no instant magic, no immediate transformation. The early years were a slow climb, brick by brick. His teams weren't bad, but they weren't champions either. UCLA won games, but not the ones that mattered. They improved, but they were never feared. 10 seasons passed, and still no titles. Wooden's philosophy was working, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. Then, in 1960, something shifted. Wooden's team stopped just competing. They started winning. The Bruins reached the NCAA tournament for the first time, finally breaking through the barrier that had held them back for decades. Then, in 1962, they reached the Final Four. The pieces were coming together. The fast break offense was overwhelming teams. The relentless conditioning wore opponents down. The meticulous, almost obsessive attention to detail turned good players into great ones. Still, there was one thing missing: championships. Wooden had built something real, but without a title, UCLA was just another team fighting for scraps in a world dominated by blue blood programs. That would soon change, and when it did, it wouldn't stop for over a decade. A whistle shrieked through the gym. The sound of sneakers cut sharply against the hardwood. A frantic blur of movement. Walt Hazzard's eye flickered up court, scanning like a predator. Then, snap! A pass zipped through the air, hitting Gail Goodrich in stride.
Dun, 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 dun.
In a blink, the ball was gone,
Passing. Shot, Gale.
banking off the glass and through the net. The defenders left gasping, chasing shadows. UCLA wasn't just running an offense. They were orchestrating chaos. This wasn't basketball the way the experts expected it to be played. It wasn't slow, methodical, built around a towering 7-footer planted in the paint. No, this was something else entirely. Something faster, sharper, relentless. John Wooden had found his players, and now he had found his system.
Success, which is peace of mind in knowing you made the effort to do the best of which you're capable.
Walt Hazzard was the engine, the point guard who never seemed to stop moving, always 2 steps ahead of the defense. Gail Goodrich was the shooter, undersized but fearless, a left-handed assassin with ice in his veins. The rest of the roster? Quick, disciplined, willing to run until their legs burned. That was the deal. If you played for Wooden, you ran. You pressed, you suffocated opponents with speed and precision until they broke. No one believed it would work. No one believed UCLA could win a championship. The experts, those old-school voices in smoky rooms back east, barely acknowledged them. The preseason rankings ignored them. The title favorites were the usual suspects: the towering front line of Michigan, the polished discipline of Kentucky, the physicality of Duke. UCLA? Too small, too unproven, too reliant on a style that, to most, seemed unsustainable. But Wooden saw what they didn't. He knew that size didn't matter when the other team couldn't even get the ball past half court. The key wasn't just speed, it was pressure. He unleashed a full-court press unlike anything college basketball had ever seen. Not a passive wait-for-a-mistake defense, but a relentless, smothering onslaught. The moment an opponent inbounded the ball, UCLA's guards swarmed like hornets. Hands reaching, bodies crashing, passing lanes disappearing in an instant. Players weren't just defending, they were attacking. The results were immediate. They ran teams into the ground. Opponents weren't just losing, they were unraveling. The breathless pace, the constant harassment, the feeling of drowning under wave after wave of blue and gold. It was too much. Teams that started strong faded by halftime. By the final whistle, they were broken. Game after game, win after win, the numbers piled up and the doubters grew quiet. Wooden's Bruins didn't just win, they dominated. Unbeaten, untouched, 30 straight wins.
Undefeated UCLA has taken over the top spot in the National Collegiate Basketball standing.
And then, the championship game. Duke was supposed to be the more polished team, the more talented team, the team with the real size, real depth. They were the ones who had played against the best all season, the ones who understood what it took to win in March. That was the narrative. Reality was something different. From the opening tip, UCLA attacked. Hazard slashed through defenders like a blur, dictating the pace with ruthless efficiency. Goodrich buried shots from everywhere, slicing through Duke's defense like paper. The press was suffocating. By halftime, the game was over. Duke wasn't just losing, they were unraveling. Passes went wild, shots rimmed out, legs gave out. When the final buzzer sounded, the scoreboard told the story. 98-83. UCLA wasn't just a champion. They were something new, something terrifying. The basketball world had been put on notice. The dynasty had begun.
I believe we're quicker than they are, and I think quickness generally prevails. The past 29 games don't mean a single thing. It's this one that's coming up.
The hunters had welcomed the hunted. A year ago, UCLA stormed through college basketball like a rogue wave, fast and unstoppable, tearing through defenses before anyone could even adjust. But now everyone saw them coming. Wooden's Bruins weren't just another good team anymore. They were the team, the defending national champions. And that meant every opponent circled their game against UCLA in red ink. There was no more sneaking up on teams, no more shocking the world. Every night, they played against teams treating it like their personal championship game. Bodies flew harder, defenses tightened, every possession carried weight. Opponents weren't just trying to win, they were trying to knock UCLA off its throne. But that was the thing about Wooden's system. It didn't rely on surprise. It wasn't built on trick plays, size mismatches, or a single transcendent player carrying the team. It was built on something stronger: precision, discipline, and adaptability. And in 1965, that adaptability was put to the test.
Never talked about winning. He didn't say we could win the championship. If you play together as a team and you play to your strengths, cover up each other's weaknesses, we've got a good chance to do well.
This team had no dominant big man, no 7-footer to anchor the paint. Conventional wisdom said you needed size to win. Centers dictated the game, controlled the boards, shut down driving lanes. But Wooden had never been one for convention. If he didn't have the towering presence inside, he would simply make the floor bigger, stretch defenses wider, play faster than anyone thought possible. And at the heart of it all, Gail Goodrich, a wiry 6'1" guard who barely looked the part of a superstar. Goodrich was pure dynamite. Left-handed, deadly accurate, fearless in the open floor. He wasn't just a scorer, he was a weapon. A relentless force of movement and energy. And in the 1965 championship game, he would put on one of the greatest performances the sport had ever seen. Michigan stood in their way, a rugged, physical team led by Cassie Russell, a future NBA star with a silky jumper and a strong frame built for the biggest moments. They had the size, they had the experience. They were ready to exploit what everyone thought was UCLA's weakness: no dominant big man, no interior force to match up against them. But what they weren't ready for was Goodrich. From the opening possession, he was everywhere, slicing through defenders, firing off quick-release jumpers, blowing past bigger, slower opponents who couldn't keep up with UCLA's unrelenting tempo. Wooden's press suffocated Michigan's ball handlers, forcing rushed passes, bad shots, panicked decisions. Meanwhile, Goodrich was unleashing a masterpiece. Shot after shot, drive after drive. Every time Michigan found a sliver of momentum, he ripped it away. By the time the buzzer sounded, the numbers were staggering. 42 points. A championship record.
As they skin the Wolverines 91-80.
Gale threw 42 points in Michigan's face.
A performance that didn't just win a game, but cemented UCLA as something greater than a one-year wonder. This wasn't just a title defense. It was a message. The UCLA dynasty wasn't a fluke. It wasn't a flash of brilliance destined to fade. It was real, and it was just getting started. For 2 years, UCLA had ruled college basketball with an iron grip. Speed, pressure, precision. They had rewritten the script on how the game was played, leaving opponents gasping for breath and chasing ghosts. But dynasties don't last without resistance, and in 1966, the first cracks in the foundation appeared. The season started with the same expectations: dominance, another championship, the continuation of Wooden's reign. But something was different. The roster wasn't as deep. The press didn't suffocate opponents the way it once did. The offense, once a flowing orchestra of movement, stuttered at times. And in March, UCLA's worst nightmare unfolded. The Bruins were eliminated in the West Regional, failing to even reach the Final Four. It wasn't just a loss, it was a gut punch. The whispers began. Maybe the run was over. Maybe Wooden's system had been figured out. Maybe UCLA had been a comet, burning brilliantly, but destined to fade. And then the scandal hit. It wasn't a massive scandal, not by the standards of college sports corruption. No bags of cash, no secret meetings with agents. Just a simple suitcase. A Samsonite suitcase given to a prized recruit by a booster. An innocent gesture by some account. But in the eyes of the NCAA, it was a violation. Wooden, the man who had built his empire on integrity, found himself in a storm of scrutiny. He hadn't orchestrated the gift. He hadn't even known about it. But the stain of impropriety lingered, a small but noticeable smudge on a coach who prided himself on doing things the right way. For a moment, it seemed like the dynasty had not only been stopped, but tainted. Then came the arrival of Lew Alcindor. 7 feet 2 inches tall, hands the size of dinner plates, a wingspan that swallowed defenders whole. He was unlike anything college basketball had ever seen, a force of nature disguised as a teenager. Every major program in the country wanted him. Powerhouses lined up at his doorstep, promising him glory, legacy, the chance to be the centerpiece of their next championship run. But he chose UCLA. Why? Because of Wooden. The game had always come easy for Alcindor. Too easy. His dominance felt inevitable, his talent undeniable. He had spent his youth towering over defenders, dunking at will, making the game look almost boring. But Wooden didn't care about his size, didn't care about his highlight reel dunks. What he saw was a raw player who had never been truly challenged, never been coached with precision. He didn't promise Alcindor an easy path. He promised him discipline, growth, the chance to master the game, not just dominate it.
Seismic event was the opening night of Pauley Pavilion, when they had the annual freshman versus varsity game.
Pauley Pavilion was absolutely packed.
All the players on both teams were just kind of standing there shaking their heads.
And then the game that changed everything. It was a simple scrimmage. UCLA's varsity against its freshman team. Standard practice. Except this time, it wasn't. Alcindor stepped onto the court against the defending national champions and made them look like a JV squad. He didn't just score, he overwhelmed them. Blocks, rebounds, unstoppable moves in the post. His presence alone changed everything. The team that had looked shaky, that had fallen short just months before, now had an answer for every problem. The dynasty had stumbled. The critics had sharpened their knives. But that day, inside that gym, something became painfully clear. UCLA wasn't done. They were about to become more dominant than ever. He caught the ball in the post, his back to the basket, the defender pressing into his body with everything he had. A lesser player might have hesitated, might have looked for an easier option. But Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, still Lew Alcindor at the time, simply rose, his imposing long arms unfolding toward the rafters. The ball left his fingertips in a smooth, effortless arc. The defender never even saw it. The Skyhook. Unblockable, unstoppable. The most devastating shot the game had ever seen. And for the next 3 years, Kareem would wield it like a weapon of war.
The greatest Best ever. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar changed the way that basketball is played.
By the time he officially suited up for UCLA in 1967, the sport had never seen anything like him. He was a 7'2", impossibly agile, and more skilled than any big man before him. He didn't just dominate, he obliterated. His footwork was polished, his instincts razor sharp. On defense, he swallowed shots whole, turned layups into desperate prayers. On offense, he made the game look absurdly easy, scoring over double teams, triple teams, entire defensive schemes designed solely to stop him. The NCAA panicked. They didn't know what to do with a player this dominant. So in 1967, they changed the rules. The dunk, one of Kareem's greatest weapons, was banned. They said it was to encourage skill development, to create a more fundamental game. But everyone knew the truth. This rule had one target, and it was Kareem. They expected him to struggle. They were fools. The dunk was gone, but Kareem adjusted. His touch around the rim became even softer. His skyhook, already deadly, became nearly automatic. And the result? Total destruction.
When they changed the rule in college basketball that says you can't dunk anymore, you know you've had a big impact on the game.
In 1967, his first varsity season, UCLA ran through the competition like wildfire. They won every game by double digits. In the national championship, they bulldozed Dayton by 15. It wasn't just a title, it was a statement. The band didn't slow Kareem down. Nothing could. The next year, the dynasty rolled on. UCLA remained unbeatable. The Bruins ran teams out of the gym before halftime, their press suffocating, their pace relentless, their star player untouchable. Then came the game. January 20, 1968. The Astrodome. Houston versus UCLA. The game of the century. The buildup was massive. Houston was undefeated. They had Elvin Hayes, a force of nature in his own right. The game was nationally televised, a first for college basketball. And in front of 52,000 fans, something shocking happened. Kareem struggled. He had been dominant for 2 years, but in this game, he was human. A scratched cornea limited his vision. Houston clogged the paint, forced awkward shots, slowed the game down. And in the end, for the first time in 3 years, UCLA lost. The critics resurfaced. Maybe Kareem wasn't unstoppable. Maybe Wooden's system could be cracked. Maybe, just maybe, their reign was over. Revenge was swift. Months later, in the NCAA tournament, UCLA met Houston again. But this time, it wasn't a game. It was a demolition. The Bruins blew them out 101-69, holding Hayes to 10 points, smothering every inch of the court. The loss in January? Erased. The dynasty was alive and well. Then, 1969, Kareem's final season. One last ride, one last championship. The entire year felt inevitable. No team could match them. No player could challenge Kareem. The Bruins stormed through the season undefeated again, and in the national championship, they made quick work of Purdue, 92-72. 3 years, 3 championships.
You have to make changes. I can't play the same way when I have Alcindor as my center as I did when I had Fred Slaughter. Of course, I had to change. You've got to take advantage of one like that.
When the final buzzer sounded, Kareem walked off the court for the last time in a UCLA uniform.
I don't see how you argue with it. In my mind, Kareem is the best.
He had redefined the sport, forced rule changes, and left behind a trail of broken teams and shattered defenses. The best player in college basketball history had come. He had conquered. And now, he was gone. The Giant was gone. For 3 years, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had been the axis around which the entire sport rotated. The Bruins didn't just win with him, they annihilated. His presence alone forced rule changes. His dominance, undeniable. But now he was in the NBA, and for the first time in years, UCLA was vulnerable. The doubters returned. They whispered that Wooden's run had been built on one player, that without Kareem, the magic would disappear, that the dynasty had been a mirage, propped up by the most dominant force the sport had ever seen. And maybe, just maybe, the rest of college basketball finally had a chance to breathe. But Wooden knew better.
My constant emphasis is always on make the most of what you have. Make the most of what you have. Don't worry about what the other fella has. Be the best you can be.
His system had never relied on one player, no matter how great. It was built on movement, pressure, discipline. And if opponents thought UCLA was going to fall apart, they hadn't been paying attention to the players waiting in the wings. Sidney Wicks and Curtis Rowe were different kinds of stars. They weren't giants who towered over defenders, but they were relentless. Wicks, a wiry 6'8" forward with a motor that never stopped, attacked the game like a street fighter. Tough, aggressive, determined to prove that his team still belonged on top. Rowe, a bruising presence in the paint, gave UCLA the physicality it needed to battle with the traditional powerhouses. Together, they didn't replace Kareem, they rewrote the script. Gone was the towering dominance of a single unstoppable player. In its place, Wooden built a machine, one that relied on speed, defensive intensity, and unrelenting pressure. The Bruins were smaller, but they were faster. They ran teams out of the gym before opponents could even adjust. And once again, UCLA found itself exactly where it always seemed to be, on the doorstep of a national championship. The 1970 title game wasn't just a test, it was a statement. Jacksonville had Artis Gilmore, a 7'2" powerhouse who looked like he'd been built in a lab to dominate the sport. If size was everything, this should have been the game where UCLA finally collapsed. But Wooden's team didn't collapse. They attacked. They ran the floor with an intensity Jacksonville couldn't match. They pressed, swarmed, and forced Gilmore out of position. By the second half, UCLA had turned what was supposed to be a dogfight into another coronation. The final score? 80-69. UCLA had lost Kareem, but they hadn't lost their identity. The critics were silenced. The next year, 1971, was even more ruthless. Now UCLA wasn't just proving it could survive without its superstar, it was proving that the dynasty was bigger than any one player.
He didn't start me.
And he would say to me,
hey, I should play.
Coach, you know I'm better than Curtis, and you know I'm better than Shaq. You know that.
Coach, why not? I can do it. Coach, I feel that, okay, Coach, I want to start shooting from way out here. He said,
no, we don't, Sidney.
Why?
You know why, Sidney.
Oh, Coach, come on. He said, no.
Finally, I said,
okay, Sidney, listen.
Until you learn it's a team game and not a one-man game, they're always going to be ahead of you.
Wicks and Rowe were relentless. The team faster, more aggressive, more suffocating. Wooden had built a monster that no longer needed a once-in-a-lifetime player to dominate. They steamrolled through the season 29-1, and in the national championship, they obliterated Villanova 68-62. 2 years, 2 championships. No Kareem? No problem. The dynasty hadn't just survived, it had evolved. The dynasty had already proven it could survive without Kareem. It had retooled, adapted, and conquered in new ways. But now John Wooden had a new weapon, a different kind of star. A red-haired 6'11" big man from San Diego who played the game with an almost unnatural fluidity. Bill Walton wasn't just tall. He wasn't just skilled. He was something else entirely.
You know, I grew up a UCLA fan with John Wooden and Walt Hazzard and Gail Goodrich and Keith Erickson and Kareem, who was the greatest player I ever played against by far. And then I got to be one of those guys. My dreams came true.
Basketball intellect in its purest form. He didn't just play the game, he saw it, 2-3 steps ahead of everyone else. He passed like a point guard, moved like a wing, rebounded like a center who took every missed shot as a personal insult. And when the ball touched his hands in the post, he didn't hesitate. One move, one quick flick of the wrist, the ball kissed the glass and dropped in. Effortless, efficient, inevitable. With Walton, UCLA didn't just continue the dynasty, it ascended. The 1972 season was destruction. They weren't just beating teams, they were erasing them. The press was suffocating, the fast break relentless. Walton anchored the paint with an iron grip, swatting away shots with ease, grabbing rebounds before opponents even knew they missed. The team moved with precision. Wooden's system now fully optimized with the perfect piece at its core. Game after game, UCLA devoured the competition. They finished the season 30-0. In the championship, Florida State was merely a formality. Another name on the growing list of victims. UCLA cruised to an 81-76 victory. It was their 7th straight title. But Wooden wasn't satisfied. Walton wasn't satisfied. The Bruins were playing for something bigger now: immortality. The 1973 season was basketball at its absolute peak. UCLA ran through opponents as if they weren't even there. Walton was unguardable. If teams tried to double him, he picked them apart with pinpoint passes. If they played him straight up, he buried them under an avalanche of smooth left-handed hooks, quick turnarounds, and unstoppable footwork. Then came the championship game. Memphis State stood in their way. A strong team, a capable team. But the moment the ball tipped, the truth became obvious. They didn't belong on the same floor. Walton delivered the most dominant individual performance in the history of college basketball. 44 points, 21 of 22 shooting. He couldn't miss. It was as if he was playing on a different level, seeing the game in slow motion while everyone else scrambled to catch up. Every time the ball left his hands, it dropped through the net as if guided by fate itself. UCLA won, 87-66. Another championship, another undefeated season. But the win wasn't just about another title. It was the moment UCLA reached basketball nirvana.
I think each year I was learning something that helped me in some aspect of the game to be a better coach. I really honestly feel that I was a better coach the last year I coached than I was the year before. But the year before, I think I was a better coach than I was the year before.
They had been great before, champions before. But now they were untouchable. The win streak kept growing. 30 wins, 40, 50. It wouldn't stop. It felt like it never would. It had been 1,092 days since UCLA had lost a basketball game. 3 straight years of perfection. 88 consecutive wins. The streak had grown so large, so mythic, that it felt impossible to break. Wooden's Bruins weren't just winning. They were untouchable. Opponents stepped onto the court knowing, deep down, they had already lost.
You're UCLA. You're heads and shoulders above everybody else. This is what we thought.
But streaks don't last forever. January 19, 1974. Notre Dame versus UCLA, South Bend, Indiana. With 3 minutes and 32 seconds left, UCLA led 70-59. Another win, inevitable as always. Then, something happened. Notre Dame, clawing, desperate, fighting against history itself, did the unthinkable. They scored the last 12 points of the game. UCLA went scoreless, rattled for over 3 minutes. When the final buzzer sounded, the scoreboard didn't make sense. Notre Dame 71, UCLA 70. Silence, shock. Wooden, expressionless, walked off the court as if it was just another loss. But something had changed. The dynasty had cracked.
I look back at my college career as one of frustration, disappointment, and ultimate embarrassment.
UCLA would regroup, of course. They'd been hit before, had stumbled before. But this time, there was something different in the air. The fear factor was gone. Opponents no longer looked at the Bruins as an inevitability, but as something mortal, beatable. The cracks widened in March. The 1974 NCAA tournament. The opponent, NC State. The game, a war. Double overtime, every possession a battle. David Thompson, NC State's high-flying superstar, soared above defenders, slicing through UCLA's once impregnable defense. Bill Walton, battered, exhausted, playing through a sprained ankle, fought back with 29 points and 18 rebounds. But it wasn't enough. NC State won 80-77, snapping UCLA's streak of 7 straight national championships. The unthinkable had happened. The game felt like more than just a loss. It felt like a shift. Wooden's dynasty had ruled for a decade, imposing its will over college basketball with surgical precision. But now, the throne was unguarded. The kingdom was vulnerable. And Wooden? He was tired. The miles had added up. The pressure, the expectations, the constant demand for perfection. It had worn on him. He was nearing retirement, and for the first time, it felt real. The question lingered. Was this the end? The walls inside UCLA's locker room had heard it all before. Pre-game speeches, strategy breakdowns, quiet moments before tip-off when a team sat together, ready to make history. But on March 29, 1975, after the national semifinal, something different happened. John Wooden stood before his players, the same way he always had. The same calm demeanor, the same steady voice, the same presence that had carried them through every fight, every battle. But then, he said something that no one expected. This will be my last game.
I want to tell you this, young man. Regardless of how the game comes out Monday, I want you to know that I've never had a team whom I've been more proud. You haven't caused me a problem on or off the court this whole season, and that's a pretty nice thing to say about the last team you'll ever teach. And there was just quiet.
Silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Wooden wasn't just their coach. He was their rock, their foundation, the man who had shaped UCLA into the greatest dynasty the sport had ever seen. And now, he was walking away. The players sat there, stunned. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. UCLA had just come off a painful loss the previous season. Their championship streak had been snapped. They were no longer the kings of college basketball. But Wooden was still supposed to be there. And yet, the decision had already been made. For years, he had carried the weight of greatness, the expectations, the demands, the relentless pursuit of perfection. It had drained him. And after this, he was done. But first, there was one more game to win. The tournament had already been a gauntlet. No longer invincible, UCLA had fought tooth and nail to reach this moment. They weren't blowing teams out anymore. They weren't untouchable. Every game felt like a test of survival. But now it was personal. The players weren't just fighting for a championship. They were fighting for him. And on March 31, 1975, UCLA walked onto the court for the last game John Wooden would ever coach. The 1975 NCAA championship game. UCLA versus Kentucky. The air inside the San Diego Sports Arena was electric. Kentucky had size, They had talent. They were the ones destined to take the throne UCLA had held for so long. But destiny didn't account for one thing. UCLA wasn't losing this game. They played with fire, with desperation, with a fury that hadn't been seen since the peak of the Dynasty. Richard Washington attacked the rim. Dave Myers battled in the paint. The defense swarmed, clawed, suffocated. And Wooden? He sat on the bench, as he always had. Calm, watching, teaching. One last time. As the seconds ticked away, UCLA pulled away. The game wasn't close anymore, 92-85. The final buzzer sounded. It was over. His players lifted him onto their shoulders, carrying him off the court. A decade of dominance. 10 championships in 12 years. The greatest dynasty in the history of college basketball had reached its final chapter. Back inside the locker room, as the celebration roared around him, Wooden gathered his players one last time. He didn't give a speech about his legacy, didn't make the moment about himself. That wasn't who he was. Instead, he told them how proud he was, how they had played the right way, how they had honored the game. Then, quietly, he walked away. John Wooden never coached another game. The dynasty was over. But its legend, that would live forever. The numbers alone are staggering. 10 national championships in 12 years. 7 straight titles. An 88-game winning streak. More Final Fours than most programs could ever dream of. His teams didn't just win. They rewrote the very DNA of college basketball. But Wooden's true greatness wasn't in the banners. It wasn't in the rings, the streaks, or the records. It was in the way he built something that transcended the game. His coaching style was unlike anything before or since. No screaming, no profanity, no fiery halftime speeches designed to spark emotion. Wooden didn't need theatrics. His players feared disappointing him more than they feared losing. He demanded precision, execution, and selflessness, not just in basketball, but in life. At the heart of it all was the pyramid of success. 15 blocks, each one a principle, a lesson. Industriousness, enthusiasm, self-control, poise. It was more than a philosophy. It was a blueprint, a guide for not just winning games, but for winning in life. Players memorized it, lived by it, and when they left UCLA, they carried it with them. But no dynasty lasts forever. When Wooden walked away in 1975, UCLA was still at the top of the mountain. But the moment he was gone, the climb got steeper. The foundation he had built remained, but the magic was gone. No coach could replicate what he had done. UCLA would still compete, still win, but they were no longer inevitable. No longer the storm that swallowed college basketball whole. No more titles, no more dominance. Just a proud program trying to live up to a ghost it would never quite reach. Because the game had changed. Recruiting had become an arms race. Television money flooded the sport. Freshmen were leaving for the NBA after one season. The world that Wooden thrived in, where players stayed for 4 years, where fundamentals were king, where coaches ruled programs with absolute authority, that world no longer existed. And then there was Sam Gilbert. For years, whispers followed UCLA's dynasty. Gilbert, a wealthy Los Angeles booster with deep pockets and no regard for NCAA rules, had become a shadowy figure behind the program. Money, gifts, perks. Players had access to things that shouldn't have been allowed.
There's always been, and still is, that undercurrent of what Sam Gilbert was doing at that time. How much it really impacts the success of UCLA basketball, I'm still not 100% certain.
Did you ever provide players with cars, or stereos, or clothes, or airline tickets, or scalpers' prices for their season basketball tickets?
No, I did not.
They came around holidays, Christmas. I mean, it was a madhouse here. He was their father, their godfather.
He was a big part of a lot of the players' lives, and I think that made him even more a part of the program, maybe more so than Coach would have liked.
An overzealous fan. I wished he wasn't, but he worried me. I was worried all the time, afraid that he was going to do something that would be illegal to players.
Wooden, ever the purist, insisted he knew nothing of it. But history isn't so forgiving. The NCAA never officially stripped any of Wooden's championships, never put an asterisk next to his legacy. But the controversy lingered, a blemish on an otherwise flawless reign. Did Wooden know? Did he turn a blind eye? Or was his empire built with help he never wanted? None of it truly mattered, because long after the banners faded and the streaks became trivia, Wooden's impact remained. His lessons endured. His words became scripture in locker rooms, boardrooms, and classrooms across the world. Be quick, but don't hurry. Failing to prepare is preparing to fail. Success is never final. Failure is never fatal. It's courage that counts. A coach, a teacher, a legend. His dynasty would never be repeated, but his influence never left. The banners still hang in Pauley Pavilion, their golden numbers gleaming under the lights, reminders of a time when UCLA wasn't just a great basketball program. It was the basketball program. But championships are just markers in time. Streaks end, dynasties fade, the game moves forward. Yet, John Wooden's influence never left.
He was a great mentor to me, and it wasn't just about basketball, it was about life.
Just learned from how he behaved.
I had two great mentors in my life, my own father and my coach, Coach Wooden.
His voice still echoes in locker rooms. His words still guide coaches. His philosophy still shapes players who never even saw him pace the sidelines. His teams didn't just win. They changed the way basketball was played, how greatness was defined, how success was measured. Because Wooden wasn't just building a team. He was building men. They came to UCLA as players, but they left as something more. They carried his lessons with them, not just in basketball, but in life. The pyramid of success wasn't just a strategy for winning games. It was a blueprint for achieving something bigger. There will be other champions, other dynasties, but none like this. Because John Wooden's UCLA wasn't just a dynasty. It was an empire. And like all great empires, its legend will never fade.